way to center ourselves as we get started this morning. So we're going to breathe in for 4. We're going to hold it for 4, exhale for 4, and then hold it for 4. I'll lead you in the first couple, and then I'll let you have a couple on your own, and then we'll get going. So I invite you to inhale with me. 2, 3, 4. Hold it for me. 2, 3, 4. Big exhale like you're blowing out a birthday candle. 2, 3, 4. And hold it. 2, 3, 4. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Big exhale. 2, 3.
Yes, yeah.
And
I'm just trying to use Zoom on this computer.
I invite you to do one more on your own. And then when you're ready, come back to the room. Okay, what are we going to be doing for the next 3 weeks on this journey? Seeing with gospel eyes. I don't have very good normal eyes. I need to change my fonts for the next time. I feel like I'm seeing with nearsighted eyes. Forming practical wisdom for public life. And then next week, conscious community and criteria, how Christians make tough calls. And then finally, guided by light, Christian decision-making in daily life. I just want to give it up to Grace for these amazing titles, because when I think of them, I'm like, oh yeah, week 1, that's the moral injury one. Week 2, that's the practical theology one. Week 3, that's the Bonhoeffer one. But Grace's titles are way more enticing. Maybe that makes you want to come back.
It's about seeing
This
with
is kind
gospel
of how we're going to
eyes.
spend our time.
With
I've been
light.
thinking of this Flannery O'Connor.
Hey, Kelly, can you go back on
It's been in
mute?
my mind as I've thought about decision making. So Flannery writes, like a very doubtful Jacob. He confronts what stands in his path and wonders if he will come out of the struggle at all. So in those decisions we make, is this the right place for me? Is this the right place for my kids? Is this the right job? Is this the right X, Y, Z? It often feels like we're wrestling, right? Like Jacob in Genesis. And that we think we're going to always make the right decision on the other side of that. But oftentimes we leave decisions with a limp, right? We leave our way of discerning not always in a way that feels like we made the best decision. And so I want to normalize that struggle. I want to normalize that it's not always easy to make the quote-unquote right decision. So, like a good professor, I have homework for you. I want you to think with me. What are you bringing into this room? What are you thinking about? What are the decisions that you're trying to make? So either in your own mind, on your notes app, on your phone, on a piece of paper, I want you to think about your question. What is your question that you're bringing to this series? How do I get my kids up on time? How do I save enough money for a down payment for a house? Why can't I blank? Where should Christians blank? Invest their time? What difference does blank make? What difference does voting make? What difference does protest make? What difference does any of this make? So thinking about what your question is for a moment. I imagine there's a lot in the room. We're all dealing with things in all our different spheres of life. And so thinking like, oh, there is a heaviness or even a joy in making decisions, in discerning between two good calls, right? Like that can still be stressful. Two good options is still a thing we have to make a decision. And maybe also like a professor, I'm going to immediately kind of complicate the question. That these things that happen in our world, sometimes they're out of our control. And the way we make decisions isn't just like easy as I make this decision, these things happen in a vacuum, and then we emerge and everything is golden. I'm going to get at what we're going to talk about. I'm going to kind of go around. I'm going to talk about trauma. I'm going to talk about moral injury as a way to think about when we make decisions, sometimes other things are compounding on top of us, making decisions or making our decisions more difficult to make. I want to talk about trauma just for a minute, so stay with me. I promise this is going to make sense. At least that's my goal, is that it's going to make sense over the next 30 or so minutes. In our lives, trauma is everywhere. If you're a podcast fiend like I am, you can go to Apple Podcasts, and there's like 5,000 podcasts that deal with trauma. Whether just the concept of it, the way we move through it, or think about the shows you're binging. Maybe you also binge a lot of shows. Maybe you're watching Shrinking. Maybe you're watching White Lotus. Maybe you're watching Severance, Grey's Anatomy, The Pit. These shows that are dealing with people confronting and dealing with their trauma, with their story, with the trauma story in ways that, like, we are drawn into those characters and we're drawn into what their stories are. So there's a sense then that trauma is in it's in our zeitgeist. It's like it is in our culture. Some of that increased after COVID, that we became more comfortable talking about trauma. Books that you would never think were on the New York Times bestseller list are now on the New York Times bestseller list. Like, people are talking about their own trauma. They're talking about their ways of moving through traumatic events. But here's the thing, though. If we can go to TikTok and get a definition of trauma just as easily as we can get taco recipes, it's like if trauma can mean anything, there's almost a sense in which trauma can mean nothing. So there's this like ubiquitousness of it that if it's everywhere, what are we talking about? And like, how do we get our arms around it? And so Resma Menakem, in his book, My Grandmother's Hand, says that trauma is a response to anything that the body experiences as too much, too soon, and too fast. So trauma is everywhere. These events in our life, so it can kind of feel like amorphous. It can kind of feel kind of spongy. How do we get our hands around this thing? And how does it impact our decisions, more importantly for our time this morning? What I want to do first is kind of separate what do we mean by trauma versus a traumatic event. It's important to think about how these things are different for people. So think with me, friends. A traumatic event first is this singular or these ongoing events that have the capacity to be traumatizing or lead to the experience of trauma. So heaven forbid, we leave here today and there's a car crash. 5 people are in it. 5 people are going to experience that differently. That's because trauma then is the subjective experience of an event. So the event happens to us outside of our control. Car crashes, tornadoes, assaults, political violence, any litany of things that I know you all are lived in the world long enough to know what some of those events might be. And then we are impacted by that. That's a lot on a slide. I apologize. I'll read it to you, though. But what I want you to pay attention to are these 3 E's. That trauma has events, experiences, and effects. They happen outside of our control. Physical attack, earthquake, pandemic. They're disrupting, they're painful. We experience that event, and then we have effects of those experiences. You wonder why it's so hard to get out of bed. You wonder why it's so hard to make decisions. You wonder why it's so difficult to think straight, to think clearly. You feel like your brain has been a fog since the event. Like your brain, prefrontal cortex, your central nervous system, these things change in traumatic events as your body's way of protecting you, but moving you through what the event was. That's because trauma is not just outside of us, it's also inside of us. Our brains are really good. Our bodies are really good at protecting us. That's why we're here. Amen. That's why we've been here. In some ways, we have survived to this point that our bodies are quite adept at bringing us through trauma. That's why I like to say that what starts as an external experience outside of our control becomes an internal response. And if we don't deal with it, friends, if we don't process it, if we don't talk about that with a pastor, or don't talk about that with a therapist, life coach, spouse, partner, it becomes an internal experience that's going to have an external response. Because our body, once again, is good about moving through these things. Even if it feels like, my body's not really helping me, this is kind of stressful actually, your body's going to bring these things out. The more we push them down, it's kind of a spring. It's just going to come up and come out. So a pastoral theologian named Karen McClintock says that these traumas are lodged in our body without our consent. So there's an internal and there's an external. These things are happening outside of us, but they're also happening inside of our very bodies. Just a little working definition for us. Response. All right, let's go one more level. Grace mentioned that I am an Army chaplain, and in a lot of my counseling sessions, when I was coming back from a deployment, I was struck by, there's the post-traumatic stress, the things you would think of. But there are these other traumas that happen to us through either like another mobilization, another deployment, another divorce, another thing that happens that they're like, well, that doesn't really feel like trauma. I don't know why I'm stressed out. It's not an IED. It's not a roadside bomb. Why am I feeling and experiencing these decisions happening to me that I'm making about my family in ways that feel traumatic? So in the early 1990s, there was a VA psychiatrist and psychologist named Jonathan Shea who started hearing similar things. I have a laser. And his Vietnam veterans were saying, they were in this little group, right? Like you could picture it, like black hats, it smells like stale coffee, and they're talking about what is right, that what is right had been violated. It's like, it didn't feel like the post-traumatic stress that you might hear of in other VA conversations, but they're like, we were told to go onto this patrol. We were told this is what we were going to do, but we knew there was going to be an ambush. We knew they told us that this boat had weapons in it, but we knew that it was just a fisherman, and we were told to fire anyways. So decisions made on our behalf that lead to traumatic implications. So Jonathan Shea calls this moral injury. And moral injury also has its own history. The way we think about combat, the way we think about what it means to come back from war, this probably won't surprise you, it has changed. In the Civil War, we would say that these soldiers had soldier's heart. Now we would look at this with our 2026 psychological, because of the heart palpitations and because of the breathing and the way they were avoiding things, this is really just PTSD. We didn't have that language in the 1860s. But friends, importantly, for these first three definitions, the problem was the person. The problem was this weak soldier. Like, if we could just get these weak people out of the army, then we can do the really brave stuff. So then we get into World War I. Maybe you're familiar with the term shell shock. So shell shock is describing, because of the rise in artillery barrages and shells exploding, there was this dazed, 1,000-yard stare look of, what did I get myself into? What am I doing in this trench, thousands of miles from home, experiencing these traumas? Once again, the military thought, this is just a problem of weak weak men. Let's just get them off the line for a little bit. We'll get them a warm meal, and then let's get them back out there. So then in that interwar period of World War I and World War II, the Army's like, you know what? I think we can actually prevent this. I think we can actually only bring in the psychologically fit, and we can get rid of the cowards. And so they did all these tests, and they found 1 million or so, and they're like, okay, you are psychologically unfit to fight. Let's go to World War II. And as you know, if maybe you have a grandparent, an uncle, so even though we don't talk about this war in the same way we do Vietnam, we start to think about combat fatigue. Once again, the problem becomes the weakness of the individual. There was a 300% increase in psychological trauma in casualties in World War II than there was in World War I. Maybe something else is going on. So then we get to Vietnam. Now we're starting to get this idea of post-traumatic stress. At first, it's called post-Vietnam syndrome, where these veterans were saying what we were asked to do was wrong. What we were ordered to do was illegal. And so, but if I told you that post-traumatic stress isn't even a thing until 1980, that means there's this huge gap between the end of the Vietnam War in 1980, where individuals were continuing to kind of fall through the cracks, feeling like they were the problem, feeling like their service, that they were a coward. And like most things in life, through advocacy, through protest, through annoying of just continuing to bring it up, through veterans and veterans organizations, and then feminists who are arguing for similar things about child abuse to say, no, the problem is not the person. These are abnormal situations that are happening to normal individuals. So post-traumatic stress becomes a normal response to an abnormal context. We're almost full circle, I promise. So moral injury then. Decisions that betray our understanding of right and wrong. So Jonathan Shea comes along in 1992 and he says that moral injury is like, for our brains and for our body, it processes this just like any other combat trauma that leads to lifelong psychological injury. Now, veterans can usually recover from horror, from fear, and grief once they return to life, so long as what is right has not been violated. So a couple of years later, Jonathan Shea says that there's these 3 things that are going on in moral injury. The thing I want you to remember is the word betrayal. There's been a betrayal of what is morally right. 2, by someone who holds legitimate authority. And that could be, for Jonathan Shea's context, it was usually like a mid-level or senior leader in the military making decisions on your behalf. And then the 3rd thing is in a high-stakes situation, like combat or like healthcare. So then about 20 years later, almost, 15-ish or so, another VA psychologist says, you know, that's true, but what about the actions we make, the decisions we make? So Brett Litz, after interviewing this first cohort or generation of veterans who were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan, said, actually, moral injury can also be things that we do, that we perpetrate, our decision-making. So perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs and expectations. I hear you thinking, Dr. Morris, I thought we were in church today. I thought we were going to talk. What does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with God? What does this have to do with any of this? Well, we got something to say too. that theologians and pastors, morality, good decision making, that kind of feels like we got something to say about that. And so just as important as Jonathan Shea is in this conversation is Rita Brock and Gabriella Latini. So think about times when you've wanted to make a decision, or you've wanted to know where to invest your time, invest your resources, invest your very body. These things can feel like, because these things feel like violations. ICE come into Charlotte, another war in the Middle East, that these things feel like deep betrayals to who we are as a person. I'm going to come back to the middle definition here in a second, but Zachary Moon, basically what this fancy definition is saying is like, what works in one world doesn't always work in another world. So what we train you to do at boot camp, when you come home, there's no like shoe camp to get you to go from one to the other. And so the dissonance between the two of these moral orienting systems, that's the thing that we deal with in society, that we deal with our families. And importantly, as we transition this morning, this is not just a military problem. So the late Larry Graham said that we all of us in this room, we all struggle with moral injury when it's broadly understood as a failure to live in accordance with our deepest moral aspirations. All right, friends, have you ever done something that violates your own moral code? Have you ever witnessed something that violates one's moral code, cherished values, spiritual assumptions? Have you ever felt helpless to address a harmful situation? Have you ever been betrayed by authorities, by peers? It's not just a military problem. It's not just a healthcare problem. These micro moral injuries, these things that we deal with every day, we all move through this. And so when we're making decisions and we're trying to think of why doesn't it matter that when I want to do these things, it doesn't seem to move the needle. It doesn't seem to do anything. They're just going to do it anyways. They're just going to invade anyways. They're just going to arrest anyways, right? But since this feels like Sunday school, let's go to the Gospel of John. We're going to be in John 18. I was going to have you all read it, but you probably can't really see the slide, so you're just going to hear more of me, okay? So listen to John's Gospel in the 18th chapter. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place because Jesus often met there with his disciples. Verse 3, so Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" They answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, verse 6, "I am he," they stepped back and fell to the ground. Again, he asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you're looking for me, let these people go." So as we change slides, I want you to think about Peter. I want you to think about Judas. I want you to think about Jesus. Let's skip forward a couple verses. Let's go to 15. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter was standing outside at the gate. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out, spoke to the woman who guarded the gate, and brought Peter in. The woman said to Peter, "You're not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." 18. Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing around it and warming themselves. Peter was also standing with them and warming himself. Skip forward. Let's go 19 to 24. Then the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard what I said to them. They know what I said." When he had said this, one of the police standing nearby Jesus struck him on the face, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. A couple more. Back to Peter. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They asked him, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the slaves of the high priest, a relative to the man whose ear Peter had cut off, interesting detail, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Again, Peter denied it, and at that moment, the cock crowed. Peter, Judas, and Jesus. Thinking about these decisions we make, you know where the story of Judas goes, dealing with the implications of his betrayal, his decision. Peter, his decision, the torment that he goes through of denying Jesus 3 times. And then we know where the Jesus story is going. As John continues, we're going to pick it up in John 21. They get to a beach. They make a meal. And when I think about decision making and I think about what we're going to do over the next 3 weeks, I think about this, that we don't do these things alone. That as Jesus brings Peter back in, "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my sheep." He says it 3 times. In a very Johannine way, to match the 3 betrayals, you get this new mission for Peter. That for Peter, there has been betrayal. This decision, these 3 opportunities, and in his saying, "I am not," the feeling of like, I let my Messiah down. I let my teacher down. I let my rabbi down. Community, mission, purpose. Then finally, transformation. There's something in this story I keep coming back to. There's a meal, there's community. That these decisions we make, they're heavy. Even the ones that feel insignificant, we get decision fatigue. We make these decisions, and we feel like, I don't even think I'm doing the right thing. I think I'm failing as a father. I think I'm failing as a spouse, as a partner, as a son, as a whatever. And in this story, at this point on the beach, the disciples had gone back to their previous way. They'd gone back to being fishermen, gone back to what they knew. And that same invitation for Peter is for them as well. There's this mission, there's this purpose of there's another decision to make. There's more discernment to be had to get back out there. And with moral injury and the way that these micro things impact us, the shame we feel. Like when I've been thinking about this series, I keep thinking but it never feels like enough. I feel like I need to do more. I feel like I'm not doing enough. I think in this story, and in this gospel in particular, Jesus holds all that. Jesus transforms all that. Jesus moves with us in that. He names it, and then he asks Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. There's this a sense of accountability, a sense of forgiveness to move forward. So these three. So as we think about decision making and the heaviness of it over these next 3 weeks, like what is the pattern? How do we discern what's right? What's right for us right now? Because that can change too. But making decisions for job, for community, for getting things out of our community, these things take time. And thinking about the micro-moral injuries, I'll end with this. What I think that this does for us is it helps to normalize. It helps to emphasize that, like, we don't just make decisions, discern God's call in our lives in a vacuum. That these things aren't impacted and compounded and impacted by all the stories, by all the decisions, by all the broader cultural picture of what's going on in this country and in this world, in this community. So my encouragement to us before I see you again next week is to have some grace for yourself. These decisions are difficult, but the best thing we can do is like one foot in front of the next, that next faithful step of whatever it is we feel God is calling to us. And like on the beach, to remember that we do not make these decisions alone. We should not make these decisions alone. So to continue to find those people on that journey to help you make those decisions. I'm going to pause there, Grace. I think that's enough trauma for one morning.
That's enough trauma for one morning. Thank you, Josh. I really appreciate what you shared and want to have a little bit more conversation with you after you have a sip of water. I have jotted down a number of things that are really intriguing and hoping that we can have a little Q&R and then open that up to anybody else who would like to ask questions. The first thing that's really coming to my mind that I think I want to start with is, you've had years of experience talking with folks who have this very real experience of moral injury. And I wrote down my question and I wrote M, capital I, and I'm like, whatever you do, don't get up and say Michigan instead of moral injury. So I'm going to try and do that. So when you were in these counseling sessions with folks who would name, probably not using the phrase moral injury, maybe using the phrase Michigan, they would name these challenges. What was most effective in overcoming that sense of moral injury? What tactics did you use? When did you notice the healing start to happen?
Great question. It's really important. I think with any story, not just stories of war or stories of like deep pain, but like to listen, to be listened to have somebody hear your story, I think is a way that like brings us back to life. Like I believe that deeply. Like to truly be listened to truly have someone hear you, like starts the process. So Judith Herman in Trauma and Recovery says that there are these like 3 stages of recovery. That the first one, the most important one is safety. Like you can't heal if you don't feel safe. But then once you feel safe, you can start to make meaning out of things. And that's where I feel like the telling of stories, like how do I make sense of what it is that happened to me? How do I make meaning out of that? And then how do I remember that and like come back to some sense of like, okay, now I'm going to start to put the pieces back together. I feel safe, I feel stable, you've heard me. My story doesn't feel like it's way out in left field, like there's some, feels normal. And so then from that to put in spiritual practices, whether that's prayer, other acts of reconciliation that feel like the normal pathways to healing we would do for anybody. I think it's after that.
So it's really interesting you name that, because when you asked what the question is that we are bringing in, and maybe I'm bringing this in, but one of my questions was, how do I parent 3-year-olds? And one of the things I'm learning about parenting 3-year-olds is when a tantrum happens or when the extreme emotion happens, like what I want to do is like put them in a room by themselves and be like, work this out all by yourself. I don't really want to be a part of, I don't enjoy this. This isn't fun for me. And what I'm learning is the most helpful is to just put my body next to my children and say, I'm here, and say like, okay, I'm going to help you work through this. And we read this book that says, you know, you're a good kid having a hard time, and like holding them close and like literally having their physical body, my physical body next to theirs to say, it's okay that I see that you feel this way. This is horrible, and I'm going to help you get through it. And it reminds me a lot. I see Hunter sitting back here who's been absolutely instrumental in our life group ministry. It reminds me a lot of what I think life groups do, which is just hold people and be like, I'm here. Let's figure this out. Somebody else is saying that it also is really hard to change careers or to be a person who is married or a person who's getting divorced, or like these things are hard, and I'm going to name that for you and hold on to that.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
When you're talking about your kids, you mentioned like you don't want to be in that space. Like you're like you want to.
No, I don't.
They also don't want to. Like we all like when we. This is what kids I think are so brilliant at, is they're so connected to the tantrum in a way that's like they can feel it, and so like to sit in what you're saying, like that is beautiful. Like that presence that like says like I see you. Maybe not as well as I saw you last time. Yeah. That's my parenting. I'm sure Grace does it better than I do, but and so
that's such an interesting point. Like they also don't want to be in it.
Yeah.
So 2 other questions I have, and then I promise to open it up. Last week, one of the things that came up for me as you were talking, especially as you were reading the John passage, last week some of us were here and heard Martha Moore Kish talk about the value of telling truth. And she talked about it from the perspective of confession. Like when we confess when we've wronged somebody, when we've participated in ways that we wish we didn't, that can lead to transformation. And that's some of what I'm hearing here too, is like sometimes we feel really overwhelmed by the bad decisions that we've made, or the decisions that we wish we hadn't made, or even sometimes decisions that we didn't even feel like decisions, just things that we did, and that kind of weighs us down. And I'm hearing maybe some like the forgiveness allows us to turn again to different kinds of decisions.
I like that a lot. That's beautiful. To turn again. I think of truth telling as like sometimes it doesn't feel like enough. It feels like the world feels so, or decisions, I keep making it so global, but like things can feel so life or death, even if it's in hindsight a small decision, but like sometimes just speaking the truth. And so like even in like the history of trauma studies, like the reason moral injury or post-traumatic stress becomes a thing is because people refuse to stop telling the truth. Like veterans rap groups would say, no, that is not right. What happened was this. And to get people to hear the story of what happened, the truth telling, like that is like a theological discipline, like being willing to like tell the truth even if it's not popular and not popular.
So on that note, I'm kind of wondering about like this, we noted at the beginning, we make 35,000 decisions a day, which honestly, the number just feels like horrifying to me to even say out loud. And I think about like these tiny decisions that we make and how they start to numb us. Like I'm thinking specifically, we're walking down the street the other day and I see a piece of trash and I look and there's like 25 pieces of trash. And I'm like, okay, I can't get like 20 of them, but I'm able to get like 3 of them. And so what do I do? Yeah. Like, should I stop and pick up the 4 pieces of trash that I can, even though I know that there's still going to be trash everywhere? And one thought that comes to mind, in addition to, of course, you should pick up the 4 pieces of trash, the old starfish model of like, at least you threw 1 starfish back into the ocean. But I'm also thinking about like what it does to me and my soul if I just say, yet again, I'm going to walk by. Yet again, I'm going to start to normalize walking past the trash, and I'm going to start to and how moral injury almost is this cloud over us that's like, yep, we're all injured, and now that you're injured, you're broken, and keep on getting injured.
Amen. That makes me think a couple things. I'm glad you brought the starfish because I was going to say that. Like, and also there's this piece of like, this might be the cheesiest thing I say over the next 3 weeks, but like, if you don't know who's watching you. I don't mean that, but like, I'm like, Grace threw away 4 pieces of trash. Oh man, I didn't throw away any pieces of trash. Maybe I should too, And so there's this sense of like, it builds, like you don't know the impact of what it's going to have. I was really down, as we all were, like, or I imagine we all were, during like ICE and CBT being here. I was like, there's nothing I can do. Like, they're going to do it anyways. And then getting coffee with you, and we're talking about the moms at the bus stop, and I was like, that's picking up trash for 4. That's something that feels very small, but like, it feels like radically like transformational in its smallness. It still feels like it's transformative. Does that connect? I just keep thinking about that. Like, we want to be the one that can like turn the tide 100% and be the, as we'll say in a couple weeks, like have that Bonhoeffer moment where like you make this perfect decision, but it's like that's just not reality. And so it's all these micro decisions where you feel inspiration from other people. And so I keep thinking about that decision.
Yeah, I wonder about that all the time, how we're like, if this isn't going to end up on the cover of the New York Times, then is it worth me doing? Like, if this isn't going to be the decision that turns the tides, what am I doing? And I think what you're naming is like, we're starting to overcome some of that injury and like, just like a little Band-Aid on it that helps make a difference.
I like overcome that. Yeah, it's a good word.
Yeah. So I want to open the conversation up to other folks who have questions or comments, or I keep coming back to, like I wrote down on my notes, like I mentioned, how do I parent 3-year-olds? And so Josh has kids, but isn't a parenting expert, and probably also is not an expert in deciding whether or not you should move to Boston for your new job. But what other questions are coming, unless maybe you are, that I'm unaware of?
I'm not going to Boston.
Yeah. Are there other questions that folks want to ask or raise to Josh that feel like curiosities too? I can pass the mic around. Yeah, Anne-Marie, I'll come to you, and then Ben, I'll come to you.
So I'm listening to this book, and now you're the second person this morning who has brought up some issue from this fiction book that I'm reading. And so what comes up is this couple is visiting a grief counselor, and she says, before you deal with grief, you have to first deal with the trauma. So your blurb about that really kind of made a little bit more sense as to why you have to start with trauma. But I wondered if you could provide any more framework of, like, once you resolve the trauma, is that really just like the salve to get to the deeper things? Is there something about the order to it, and when doesn't it work?
Does
it not work?
When does it not work? I think when it doesn't work is when you're not willing to deal with it, like, honestly. Back to Judith Herman, like, we can't, our bodies are going to be in those stages of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn until we can, like, have a sense of safety. And that's physical safety, right? Like, you feel safe in a house, you feel safe in your community, you feel safe in your body, but it's also like emotional safety, it's spiritual safety. Like, so many people who are coming through like religious trauma are like, I don't even have time to deal with the grief of God because I can't come back into this building because of what happened to me. And so until we have a sense of safety to deal with the trauma, like, then moving through the grief, like, but not through it like we're going to get through it. Like, we're forever changed by these things. It's now a part of us. And so I might not be answering your question, but what immediately came to mind was, like, you have to deal with the underlying, because it's going to impact everything else. the way we think about it implicates our decision making, or the way we process, the way we feel in public, the way we feel in different spaces, based on how we deal with those traumas. And they don't have to be the big T traumas, right? They can be like little things too, like the way we respond or feel like these little T traumas of like, this feels traumatic, but it's like, gosh, this wasn't a car crash, this wasn't a violent attack. Why am I feeling so on edge all the time? And it's like, until we can like point and like shine a light on that, like the real healing comes when we can like deal with all these things that come up for us in our bodies and in our spaces. What's the book you're reading or listening to?
It's Wally Lamb's newest book.
Awesome.
About a river.
Something about a river.
Yeah,
I like it.
I can, well, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
I can look it up, but I'll
Yeah, what was your name again? Hey, good to meet you.
So thanks for being here and taking questions. It seems as though one of the defining characteristics of modern life is that the choices that we make, either in reality or in terms of their efficacy, is really constrained by the systems that we work in, right? Like most of us don't have the decision, whether to bomb a fishing boat or participate in My Lai. But we all face situations where, like, if my employer is mistreating the people that I'm responsible for, I can quit, and then somebody else will be put in that situation. And none of the harm will be averted, and then I'll go work for another employer that does basically the same thing. Or, we're told that we have to not use straws because we're the source of huge environmental disaster, when in fact, like,
We're not.
We're not.
Right.
And so, how do you, if you could speak to, how do you deal with those situations where I think a lot of our thinking about this is shaped by, we have a choice to make, and in reality, a lot of modern life is we either don't have a practical or effective choice to make, or the choices that we have are really kind of illusory.
What's your name? Ben. Good to
Ben.
Yeah, good to meet you. That is such, you did in 1 minute what I was trying to do. That was such a beautiful question, because to think that like we do make these decisions and we think, but it's also like you need to have like a metal straw. You need to do these things that it feels like all the things we do, they feel like a Band-Aid over like a gunshot wound. Like it's not gonna change anything. But the things that I think we do have influence over, maybe it's a better word than control over, is how we, like those small spheres of influence we do have. Like you're saying, like with the employees, like the decision is, if I leave here, what are the implications? If I stay here, what are the implications? Like, can I actually affect change? Is the boss above me going to be able to hear me say, we're not treating this department well? My experience in healthcare, like in those roles, is like, it does feel like, no, it's not gonna change things, and these things roll as a machine rolls. And so it's like, how do we make the best decisions in those, with the little bit of influence we have to like make the lives better of the people to our right and our left? I feel like that's what the moral injury literature has been so helpful for me in my own life, but also like in counseling, is like to see like this was outside of your control from the very beginning. And so these situations that we get thrust into sometimes, and these events happen, it's like we as the individual end up bearing the weight and the responsibility of the poor decision making that happens above, around, and sometimes below us. And so what you named that I was just like, you used the word illusory, which I think is a perfect word for what this feels like. And so it's like, what can we control, or what can we influence? And it does feel like those pieces of trash. It feels, I say pieces of trash, that sounded bad. Pieces of litter on the ground. And so, am I scratching at an answer? Ben, what do you think?
I mean, I don't know if there is one.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think,
that's right.
Ben, so much of what you're naming, and Josh, what you're naming, is what brings many of us here, is that feeling of, does my decision make a difference? Not just what decision should I make, and we're always asking that question, what decision should I make, and how much of a difference is it going to make? And the challenge that we have there is we can control the decision. Sometimes it's hard to control the influence. And I think that's what brings us here. And I really am glad that we're bringing it into community. And as you're naming, like, the value of having this conversation, but also the hard conversations in community. They might not reveal the clear answer, but they begin to reveal something of the light or something of the truth, which is a lot of what we're talking about in this season. Well, I want to thank you, Josh, for being here, and thank you for being here for the coming 2 weeks. I'm certainly really intrigued by this conversation, and I was oddly noting, I think this question that we're asking of, like, what decision should I make, might be one of the most commonly, like, ChatGPT questions, like, should I move to Boston? Should I do this? And you've offered us something that's so much better than what we're going to find on Google or on ChatGPT. Like, we're actually, as much as we seem to want to be looking for the easy answer of tell me what to do, what we really want to uncover is how we can find what's best for ourselves and best for the community, and how we can unravel that. So thank you for beginning to unravel that with us. And we look forward for you being back next week. Encourage you all to be back next week, same time, same place, and to invite a friend. And I would love to close us in prayer. Let's pray together. Gracious God, we give you thanks. Thanks for bringing us together in community this morning. Thanks for bringing us together to this community where we can carefully consider the ways that you call us to be, where we can unravel the things that have hurt us, the ways we have hurt others, so that we might take the next faithful step, looking for the ways that our spheres of influence might make just a bit of a difference in bringing your kingdom to our world. So send us into the week ahead, inspired and curious, ready to look for the ways that we can act in the world and pick up just one of those pieces of trash. In your name we pray. Amen. So we've got coffee and muffins and yummies in the back, and I think Josh is willing to hang out for a while and hang out and chat, so I invite you to do so. Thank you for being here. It's good to be with you.